The rifle clicked. Caleb Harlan froze in his own doorway, snow melting off his shoulders, staring down the barrel of his own gun. Behind it stood a woman, pregnant, trembling, her finger too tight on the trigger. Their eyes locked in the firelight. One wrong move, and this cabin would become a tomb for both of them. This is a story about two people running from their pasts, a winter that wouldn't forgive, and a night that changed everything. If you stay with me until the end, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The Colorado Rockies had seen 100 winters, but none quite like the one that gripped the mountains in 1882. It came early, fierce, and without mercy, a white fist closing around the peaks and valleys, squeezing the life from everything that couldn't hide or run. The aspens stood like skeletal fingers against the sky, their bark black with ice. The creeks froze solid. Even the wolves had gone quiet, conserving energy, waiting. Caleb Harlan didn't mind the silence. He'd been living in it for 15 years. His cabin sat in a valley so remote it didn't appear on any map, tucked between two ridges that kept the worst winds at bay. It was rough-hewn, built from lodgepole pine he'd felled himself, chinked with moss and clay. A stone chimney rose from the center, perpetually smoking. Inside it was spare, a sleeping platform, a table, a few shelves, a stove. Everything a man needed. Nothing he didn't. Caleb had learned to live small. He was 42 years old, though the mountains had aged him beyond his years. His hair, once dark, was streaked with gray. His face was carved by wind and sun into something harder than wood. His hands were scarred from axe work, trapping, and a dozen injuries that had healed crooked because there was no one to set them straight. He stood just over 6 feet, lean and strong in the way of men who worked every day to survive. He spoke to no one, saw no one. The nearest town was Leadville, 3 days' ride through terrain that could kill a man in 100 different ways. He went twice a year for supplies, salt, coffee, ammunition, and left as quickly as he came. People in Leadville knew his name, but not his story. They'd learned not to ask. That suited Caleb just fine. It was late November when he left the cabin for his trapline, a circuit that took 2 days to run in good weather. He packed light, jerky, hardtack, a bedroll, his Sharps rifle. The sky was low and gray, threatening snow, but he'd read weather in these mountains for more than a decade. He figured he had time. He figured wrong. The storm hit on the second day, rolling over the ridges like an avalanche of clouds. Within an hour, visibility dropped to nothing. The temperature plunged. Caleb abandoned the last of his traps and turned back, navigating by instinct and memory, following drainages he knew by heart. His beard turned white with frost. His fingers went numb inside his gloves. By the time he reached the valley, night had fallen and the storm was howling. He saw the smoke first, a thin line rising from his chimney, barely visible against the dark sky. His chest tightened. No one came up here. No one even knew this place existed. For a wild moment, he wondered if he'd imagined it, if the cold had finally gotten to him. But the smoke was real. Caleb approached slowly, quietly, his rifle in hand. The cabin was dark except for a faint glow through the oiled paper window. He could hear the wind shrieking through the pines, but underneath it, something else. The crackle of a fire. His fire. He moved to the door, paused, then pushed it open. Warmth hit him first. The blessed heat of the stove. Then the smell. Wood smoke, wet wool. Something cooking. And then he saw her. A woman stood in the center of his cabin, holding his rifle. Not aiming it exactly, but not aiming it either. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. Her dress was plain, brown wool, soaked through at the hem and knees. Her face was pale, exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red. And she was pregnant, very pregnant. They stared at each other. "Don't move," she said. Her voice was hoarse, shaking slightly. Caleb didn't move. He'd faced down grizzlies, mountain lions, men with worse intentions than this woman could muster. But something in her desperation told him this was different. This was the kind of scared that could make people do stupid things. "That's my rifle," he said quietly. "I know. And my cabin. I know that too." Silence. The fire popped. Outside, the wind screamed. "I don't want trouble," she said. "I just need a place to stay. A few days, maybe a week. Then I'll go." Caleb's eyes flicked around the cabin. She'd made herself at home. His blankets were on the sleeping platform, a pot was heating on the stove, his supplies had been rummaged through. She'd even stacked more wood by the fire. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Elena." "Elena what?" "Just Elena." "All right, just Elena. I'm going to put my rifle down now, real slow, then we're going to talk." "No." She raised the gun higher. "You stay right there." Caleb sighed. His shoulders ached. His feet were blocks of ice. He'd been walking for 14 hours through a blizzard, and he was in no mood for this. "Listen," he said, "I don't know who you're running from or what kind of trouble you're in, but I promise you, I'm not it. I live alone. I don't bother anyone. I don't want company. But if you shoot me, you'll die up here. You understand that? This storm's going to last 3, maybe 4 days. You got enough food for that? You know how to keep the stove from smoking? You know what to do if the roof starts to cave in from the snow?" Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. "I didn't think so," Caleb said. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to step inside, close this door before all my heat gets out, and we're going to figure this out like civilized people. Or you can shoot me and take your chances alone." He didn't wait for her response. He stepped forward, pushed the door shut behind him, and set his sharps against the wall. Then he turned to face her, hands open at his sides. "Your move," he said. Elena's finger trembled on the trigger. Her breathing was shallow, quick. She was terrified. He could see it now, the kind of fear that went bone deep. But she was also smart enough to know he was right. Slowly, she lowered the rifle. "Thank you," Caleb said. He crossed to the stove, pulled off his gloves, and held his hands over the heat. Feeling crept back into his fingers, painful and prickling. "How did you find this place?" he asked, not looking at her. I just walked until I couldn't walk anymore." "You came from the east?" "Yes." "Through the pass?" "I don't know what it's called. It was the only way through." Caleb nodded slowly. That pass was brutal even in summer. In winter, it was near suicidal. The fact that she'd made it at all, in her condition, told him something important. She was tougher than she looked. "Who's after you?" he asked. "No one." "Don't lie to me. People don't cross that pass in winter unless they're running from something worse than the cold." She said nothing. Caleb turned to face her. "I need to know what I'm dealing with. Are there men coming? Law? Outlaws?" "I don't know," she said quietly. "Maybe. I don't think they could track me through the storm. But they know you're in these mountains." She nodded. Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. This was bad. This was everything he'd built this life to avoid. Other people's problems, other people's violence, other people's needs. "You can't stay," he said. "I have nowhere else to go." "Not my problem." "Please," her voice cracked. "I just need a few days. A week. Just until—" She gestured vaguely at her stomach. Caleb stared at her. At the swell of her belly, the exhaustion carved into her face, the way she was standing, feet apart, weight shifted, one hand pressed to her lower back. He'd seen that posture before, long ago. "When are you due?" he asked. "I don't know exactly. Soon." "How soon?" "A few weeks, maybe less." Jesus Christ. He turned away, stared at the wall. His mind was racing, calculating. She couldn't leave, not in this storm, not in her condition. If he sent her out now, she'd die. The baby would die. And he'd have to live with that. Again. "All right," he said finally. "Here's the deal. You can stay until the baby comes. But you earn your keep. You cook, you clean, you help with whatever needs doing. And when the baby's born and the weather breaks, you leave. No arguments, no delays, understood?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This isn't charity. I don't do charity." "I understand." "And one more thing." He turned to face her, his eyes hard. "You don't ask about my past. I don't ask about yours. We keep this simple. Professional. You're not my guest. You're not my friend. You're just someone passing through. Something flickered in her eyes, hurt maybe, or relief. She nodded. All right then, Caleb said. He moved past her to the stove, lifted the lid of the pot.
This story was posted on the channel West of Betrayal.
Simple.
Please do not repost it in any form.
You made this. I used what I found. I'm sorry if... It's fine. He ladled some into a bowl, handed it to her, then served himself. They ate in silence, standing on opposite sides of the small cabin. The storm hammered at the walls. The fire burned low. When they finished, Caleb gestured to the sleeping platform. You take that. I'll sleep on the floor. I can't take your... It's not a discussion. You need the rest more than I do. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She was too tired to fight. She climbed onto the platform, wrapped herself in the blankets, and lay down on her side, facing the wall. Caleb spread his bedroll near the stove, lay down with his rifle beside him, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. And somewhere between them, in the fragile space of this cabin, two strangers tried to sleep while their secrets pressed against their ribs like knives. I saw it. The days that followed fell into an uneasy rhythm. Caleb woke before dawn each morning to feed the fire and check the weather. The storm had settled into something relentless, not the furious violence of the first night, but a steady, grinding assault of wind and snow that showed no signs of breaking. The drifts piled higher each day, burying the cabin's lower walls, smoothing the landscape into an endless white expanse. They were trapped. Both of them knew it. Elena kept her word. She cooked, cleaned, mended the gaps in the chinking with strips of cloth torn from her petticoat. She moved quietly through the cabin, always aware of where Caleb was, always giving him space. She didn't talk much. Neither did he. But silence, Caleb learned, could be its own kind of conversation. He noticed things. The way she pressed her hand to her belly when she thought he wasn't looking, whispering something too soft to hear. The way she flinched when the wind hit a certain pitch, as if expecting a door to burst open. The way she never fully relaxed, even when sitting, even when eating. She was afraid. Constantly, deeply afraid. And he noticed something else. She was good at this. At surviving. She rationed the food carefully, never taking more than her share. She kept the cabin cleaner than it had been in years. She didn't complain about the cold, the close quarters, the endless monotony of snowbound days. She'd been through worse. He could see it in her eyes. One afternoon, about 4 days in, the storm paused. The wind died to a whisper. The snow stopped falling, and a watery sunlight broke through the clouds. Caleb took the opportunity to clear snow from the roof before the weight became dangerous. He climbed up with a shovel, working methodically, aware of Elena watching him through the window. When he came back inside, she'd made coffee. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute he'd been stretching for months. The smell filled the cabin. "Where'd you find that?" he asked. "In the back of your shelf. You were saving it." "For a special occasion?" "I thought this qualified." She handed him a cup. "We haven't killed each other yet." It was the first joke she'd made. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. "True enough," he said. They drank in silence. The coffee was strong, bitter, perfect. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. Caleb tensed. "Depends on what it is." "Why do you live up here? Alone?" "That breaks the rules." "You said I couldn't ask about your past. This is your present." He considered that. "Same reason you're running, probably. I wanted to be somewhere no one could find me." "Did it work?" "Until you showed up?" She nodded slowly, staring into her cup. "I'm sorry for that. For intruding." "You already apologized." "I know, but I mean it." They lapsed into silence again. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful in a harsh, indifferent way. Caleb had stopped noticing years ago, but with Elena here, he found himself seeing it again. "What was her name?" Elena asked quietly. Caleb's hands tightened on his cup. "What?" "The woman you lost. Or the family. Whatever it was that brought you here." For a moment, he didn't answer, couldn't answer. The walls he'd built were thick, reinforced by 15 years of solitude and silence. No one had asked him that question in all that time because no one had gotten close enough to ask. You don't know anything about me, he said, his voice low and hard. I know enough. I know what guilt looks like. I see it every time you look at me. He stood abruptly, set his cup down hard enough that coffee sloshed over the rim. This conversation's over. I'm right, aren't I? Get some rest. You need it. He grabbed his coat and walked out into the cold, leaving her alone in the cabin. The sun was gone now, the temperature plummeting. He stood in the snow, breathing hard, watching his breath cloud in the air. She was right. Sarah. Her name was Sarah, and their daughter had been called Emma, though she'd only lived long enough to be baptized. They died in childbirth 16 years ago in a cabin not unlike this one, while Caleb had been 3 days away on a hunting trip. He'd come home to find them both cold, his wife's eyes still open, the baby blue in her arms. He'd buried them under an oak tree in Missouri, sold everything he owned, and walked west until the world ran out. And then he'd kept walking. He'd sworn he'd never let anyone depend on him again, never let anyone get close enough to die on him. And now here was Elena, pregnant and vulnerable, a living reminder of every failure he'd tried to bury. He stayed outside until he couldn't feel his fingers, then went back in. Elena was lying on the sleeping platform, eyes closed, but he knew she wasn't asleep. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, just lay down on his bedroll and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion dragged him under. 2 more days passed. The storm returned with renewed fury. Caleb and Elena fell back into their routine, but something had shifted. The silence between them was different now, less defensive, more companionable. She started talking more. Small things at first. Comments about the weather, questions about how to maintain the stove, observations about the cabin. Caleb answered curtly, but he answered. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he started talking too. He told her about the land, the mountains, the animals, how to read the sky for weather, how to tell a fresh track from an old one, which plants could be eaten and which would kill you. He didn't realize he was teaching her until she started asking better questions, making connections, learning. One evening, as she stirred a pot of stew, she said, "You're a good teacher." Caleb looked up from the axe he was sharpening. "What?" "The way you explain things. You make it clear, simple. It's just common sense." "No, it's not." "No, it's common sense is different for everyone. You're patient." He grunted, went back to his work, but her words stayed with him. That night, the baby moved. Elena gasped, pressed her hand to her stomach, and Caleb looked over sharply. "You all right?" "Yes, just active tonight." She smiled faintly, that same sad private smile he'd seen before. "Sometimes I forget, you know? For a few minutes, I'll be doing something and I'll forget everything that happened. And then," she gestured at her belly, "and then I remember." "The father," Caleb said. "Where is he?" She went very still. "I can't talk about that." "You brought him up." "I brought up the baby, not him." "They're connected." "Not anymore." Caleb set down the axe. "Elena, if there's something I need to know, if there's danger coming for you, for this cabin, I need to know now." She met his eyes, and for a moment he thought she might tell him, but then she looked away. "There's always danger," she said quietly, "for people like us. But no one's coming. Not through this storm. We're safe for now." "For now." "For now," she agreed. It wasn't enough. Caleb knew that, but he also knew he couldn't push her, not yet. So he let it drop, and they went to bed, and the storm raged on. On the 8th day, the weather finally broke. The sky cleared, the sun came out, and the world was suddenly blindingly bright. Caleb went outside to assess the damage and found the drifts were taller than he was in places. It would take days to dig out the supplies he'd buried, to check the trapline, to make sure the cache was still intact. But the air was calm. The temperature was rising. The worst was over. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt something closer to dread. When he came back inside, Elena was standing by the window looking out at the snow. Her hand rested on her belly. She didn't turn when he entered. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's deadly." "Both things can be true." Caleb hung his coat on a peg, crossed to the stove. "Storm's over. Another few days and the trails will be passable. I know.
This story was
You'll be able to
posted
leave
on the
soon.
channel west of
I
Betrayal.
know.
Please do not
She still
repost
hadn't
it
turned
in any
around.
form.
Caleb studied her profile, the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the way the light caught in her hair. She looked different than she had that first night, healthier, calmer, but still impossibly sad. Elena, he said, what are you running from? She was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, she spoke. A life I can't go back to, she said. A man who's either dead or in prison. And a future I don't know how to face. The baby's father? My husband. She turned to face him now, her eyes clear and direct. His name was Thomas. Is Thomas. I don't even know anymore. Is he the reason you're running? No, he's the reason I can't stop. Before Caleb could ask what she meant, she crossed to her pack, a battered leather satchel she kept tucked behind the sleeping platform. She pulled out a bundle of letters, tied with string, and held them up. I burned most of these, she said. Back at a cabin I stayed at 3 weeks ago, but I kept a few. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself it was real. Letters from your husband? From the prison, Cannon City. She set them on the table between them. Thomas was convicted of embezzlement 2 years ago, 5-year sentence. He swore he didn't do it, but the evidence was overwhelming. I believed him anyway. I visited him every month, brought him books, wrote him letters. I told myself we'd survive it, that we'd start over when he got out. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. And then 6 months ago, I found out I was pregnant, and everything changed. Caleb said nothing, waited. I wrote to him, Elena continued, told him about the baby, asked what we should do, and he wrote back. She picked up one of the letters, unfolded it, stared at the words. He told me to leave, to run, to never come back. Why? Because it wasn't safe. Because there were men, powerful men, who'd use the baby to hurt us both. He wouldn't say more than that, just that I had to disappear. So you did, she nodded. I sold everything we had, bought a train ticket to Denver, then another to Leadville, hired a guide to take me into the mountains. He robbed me halfway through and left me with nothing. I walked for 3 days before I found your cabin. Caleb exhaled slowly. And you don't know if these men are still looking for you? No. But Thomas wouldn't have told me to run if it wasn't serious. She looked at him, her eyes fierce. I'm not stupid, Caleb. I know what this looks like. I know I'm asking you to take a risk just by letting me stay. But I swear to you, when this baby comes, I'll leave. I'll go somewhere far enough that no one will ever connect us. And where's that? I don't know yet. California, maybe. Canada. With the newborn. In winter. I'll manage. You'll die. Then I'll die. Her voice was hard now. But I won't bring trouble to your door. You've been kind to me. Kinder than you needed to be. I won't repay that by putting you in danger. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth written in every line of her body. She meant it. She would walk out into the snow and the cold with a baby in her arms, and she would die before she asked him for more than he'd already given. It reminded him of someone he'd been a long time ago. All right, he said quietly. We'll figure it out, but not tonight. She nodded, relief washing over her face. Thank you. Don't thank me. I haven't done anything yet. That night they ate dinner in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. The kind that comes when two people stop pretending they're strangers, and outside the stars came out over the mountains, cold and bright and impossibly far away. The next morning Caleb woke to find Elena standing by the stove, doubled over, her hand pressed to her side. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps. What's wrong? He asked, sitting up quickly. Nothing, just... She winced. Just a cramp. It's fine. You sure? Yes. It happens sometimes. The baby shifts and... She gasped again, sharper this time. Caleb was on his feet now, crossing to her. Sit down. I'm fine. Sit. Down. She obeyed, lowering herself carefully onto the bench. Caleb knelt in front of her, his mind racing through memories 16 years old. Sarah's pains in the final weeks, the false labors, the way she'd tried to hide her fear. How long has this been happening? He asked. A few days. It's normal. How do you know? She hesitated. I don't, but I can't panic every time something hurts. Caleb studied her face. She was pale, her forehead damp with sweat, but the pain seemed to be easing. Her breathing slowed. If it gets worse, he said, you tell me, immediately. Understood? I will. I mean it, Elena. I need to know what I'm dealing with. I said I will. They stared at each other. Then Elena's expression softened. You're scared, she said quietly. I'm practical. You're scared. I can see it. Caleb stood, turned away. Get some rest. I'm going to check the trap line. Caleb, but he was already pulling on his coat, grabbing his rifle. He needed to get out, needed to breathe. Outside, the cold hit him like a fist. He welcomed it. He spent the day working the trap line, checking traps, resetting snares, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind quiet. But everywhere he looked, he saw Sarah, heard her voice, felt the weight of his failure like a stone in his chest. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sun was setting and his hands were numb. Elena had dinner ready, rabbit stew, biscuits, coffee. She didn't ask where he'd been, didn't ask if he was all right. She just handed him a bowl and sat down beside him. And for the first time in 15 years, Caleb didn't feel quite so alone. They ate together. The fire crackled. The night settled in. And somewhere in the darkness outside, the mountains kept their secrets. For now. The days began to blur together in a way that unsettled Caleb. Not because they were monotonous. He'd lived 15 years of monotony and welcomed it, but because they were starting to feel like something else entirely. Something dangerously close to routine, to normalcy. Elena woke each morning before him now, stoking the fire, starting coffee, moving through the cabin with a quiet efficiency that transformed the space. She'd scrubbed the floor until the old planks showed their original color. She'd organized his supplies, mended his spare shirt, even fashioned crude curtains from an old blanket to keep the draft from the window. The cabin was still rough, still primitive, but it had become something it hadn't been in years. It had become a home. Caleb told himself it was temporary, that as soon as the snow melted enough for travel, she'd be gone and things would return to normal. But some part of him, the part he tried hardest to ignore, knew that normal was already gone. You couldn't unknow someone once you'd seen them at their most vulnerable. You couldn't unhear their voice once it had filled the silence you'd been living in. 3 weeks had passed since that first night. The worst of winter still held the mountains in its grip, but the days were getting longer, the sun stronger. Caleb went out daily now to hunt, to check his traps, to split wood. Elena stayed close to the cabin, unwilling or unable to venture far in her condition. Her belly had grown noticeably larger, her movements slower, more careful. She never complained. One morning, Caleb returned from checking snares to find her sitting at the table, staring at the wall with an expression he couldn't read. The remains of breakfast sat cold on the stove. She didn't look up when he entered. You all right? He asked, hanging his coat. Fine. You don't look fine. I said I'm fine. Her voice was sharp, defensive. Then she seemed to catch herself. I'm sorry. I didn't sleep well. Caleb crossed to the stove, poured himself coffee. The baby keeping you up? Among other things. He waited, but she didn't elaborate. After a moment, he sat down across from her. What's on your mind? He asked. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if weighing whether to trust him with something heavy. Then she stood, walked to her pack, and pulled out the bundle of letters again. This time, though, she selected one, a single envelope, creased and worn from handling, and set it on the table between them. I lied to you, she said quietly. Caleb's hand tightened on his cup. About what? About Thomas. About why I'm running. She gestured to the letter. I told you he was in prison for embezzlement. That's true. But I didn't tell you the rest. I'm listening. Elena sat back down, her hands folded in her lap. The embezzlement charge was a setup. Thomas worked as a clerk for the Territorial Land Office in Denver. He kept records, filed paperwork, routine things, but he started noticing discrepancies. Parcels being transferred under false names, deeds being altered, money disappearing. He thought it was simple corruption at first, but when he dug deeper, he realized
This
it
story
bigger
was
than
posted on the channel
She
west
paused,
of Betrayal.
choosing her words carefully.
Please do not repost
There was
it
an
in any
officer,
form.
a captain in the territorial militia named Garrett Shaw. He was running a scheme to steal land from settlers, mostly miners and homesteaders who didn't have legal help. He'd use his authority to seize property on false pretenses, then sell it through shell companies. Thomas found proof. Documents, ledgers, everything. Caleb felt ice forming in his chest. Let me guess. He tried to report it. He went to the marshal, showed him everything. Elena's voice was flat now, emotionless. The next day, the marshal arrested Thomas. They found $2,000 in our home, money Thomas had never seen before. The documents he'd gathered were gone. And Captain Shaw testified that Thomas had been helping him all along, that he'd gotten greedy and tried to blackmail Shaw for more money. They framed him. Completely. Thomas was convicted in 3 days. The judge was Shaw's brother-in-law. She touched the letter with one finger. This came 6 months ago. From a guard at the prison. He said Thomas wanted me to know the truth, that Shaw had threatened to kill me if Thomas didn't take the fall quietly. That's why he confessed. That's why he told me to run. Caleb set down his cup very carefully. And you think Shaw's men are still looking for you? I don't know. Thomas thought they might be. He said Shaw doesn't leave loose ends, and a pregnant wife is definitely a loose end. So you've been running blind. No idea if anyone's actually following you. What was I supposed to do? Her voice rose slightly. Wait around to find out? Hope that Shaw decides I'm not worth the trouble? I'm not criticizing you. I'm trying to understand what we're dealing with. We? Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. There is no we, Caleb. This is my problem. You said so yourself. I'm just passing through. You're in my cabin. That makes it my problem too. Then I'll leave. Today. Right now. Sit down. I won't bring this on you. Sit down. His voice was hard enough that she obeyed, though her jaw was set in defiance. Caleb leaned forward. You're not going anywhere. Not in your condition, not with armed men potentially looking for you. We're going to think this through. There's nothing to think through. If Shaw's men come, I'll deal with it. How? You can barely walk 100 yards without getting winded. You think you can outrun professional killers? Her eyes flashed. I've made it this far. By luck. And luck runs out. He stood, paced to the window, stared out at the snow. His mind was working through scenarios, possibilities, none of them good. This Captain Shaw, he's territorial militia? Was. He retired last year, but he still has connections. Friends in the Marshal Service, the land office, even the governor's mansion. And you're sure the guard's letter was legitimate? Not another trap? Elena's hand moved to her stomach, protective. The guard was killed 3 days after he sent it. Fell down a stairwell, they said. Broke his neck. Hell. Caleb turned back to her. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I didn't want you to have a reason to throw me out. And because... She hesitated. Because saying it out loud makes it real. As long as I didn't talk about it, I could pretend it was just paranoia. That maybe I was safe. They stared at each other across the small cabin. Outside, a raven called, harsh and lonely. All right, Caleb said finally. Here's what we know. Shaw has money, power, and motivation to keep you quiet. But he's not omniscient. You covered your tracks coming here. No one knows about this cabin. As long as we're careful, as long as we don't draw attention, there's no reason to think anyone will find you. And after the baby comes? We'll figure it out. Maybe there's somewhere you can go. A city big enough to disappear in. San Francisco, maybe, or Portland. With what money? I told you, the guy took everything. I have some saved. Not much, but enough for a train ticket. Enough to get you started. Elena shook her head slowly. Why would you do that? Why would you help me? It was a fair question. Caleb had asked himself the same thing a dozen times. The smart play was to send her on her way the moment the snow cleared, to wash his hands of her problems and go back to his solitary existence. That's what he'd spent 15 years building, a life where no one could hurt him because no one could get close enough to try. But looking at Elena now, exhausted, terrified, carrying a child into a world that wanted her dead, he found he couldn't do it, couldn't turn away. Because, he said quietly, someone should have helped me once, and no one did. Elena's eyes softened. For a moment, it looked like she might cry. Then she straightened, pulled herself together. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. That night, they sat by the fire longer than usual, neither quite ready for sleep. Elena mended one of Caleb's socks while he worked oil into his boots. The silence between them was comfortable now, companionable. Can I ask you something? Elena said after a while. Maybe. That first night, when I asked about the woman you lost, you never answered. Caleb's hand stilled on the boot. No, I didn't. You don't have to tell me, but I've told you everything now. About Thomas, about Shaw, about why I'm running. It seems only fair. He wanted to refuse, to shut down the conversation the way he had before. But she was right. She trusted him with her truth. The least he could do was offer his own. Her name was Sarah, he said, not looking up. We were married young, 18, both of us. Built a homestead in Missouri near the Arkansas border. It was hard work, but we were happy, or I thought we were. What happened? She got pregnant. I was thrilled. Stupid, maybe, but thrilled. Started building a crib, clearing more land, planning for the future. He set down the boot, stared at his hands. I went on a hunting trip in her 8th month. Needed to stock up on meat for winter. Told her I'd be back in 3 days, 4 at most. And you weren't. I was gone 5. Got caught in a storm, had to wait it out. When I finally made it home, his voice caught. He forced himself to continue. She'd gone into labor alone. Something went wrong. The baby was breech, probably. Sarah tried to deliver herself. By the time I found them, they'd been dead for 2 days. Elena's hand had stopped moving. She was staring at him, her expression stricken. I buried them both under an oak tree, Caleb said. Sold the homestead for whatever I could get. Started walking west. I told myself I just needed distance, that I'd settle somewhere new, start over. But I kept walking. Through Kansas, Colorado, into these mountains, and when I finally stopped, I built this cabin, made it as remote as possible, as isolated. So no one could die on you again. So I couldn't fail anyone again. He met her eyes. That's why I live alone, Elena. Not because I hate people, because I can't be trusted with them. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You didn't fail them, Caleb. You weren't there, but that doesn't make it your fault. Doesn't it? If I'd been home, if you'd been home, maybe nothing would have changed. Maybe Sarah still would have died. Maybe you both would have. Her voice was gentle but firm. I've spent 2 years telling myself that if I'd just seen the signs earlier, if I'd just convinced Thomas not to report Shaw, everything would be different. But it wouldn't. Shaw would still be corrupt. Thomas would still have found out. The only difference is who I'd be blaming. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? She set down the sock, leaned forward. We can't control what happens, Caleb. We can only control what we do next. You chose to help me. That's not failure. That's the opposite. Caleb looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. You should get some rest. It's late. Elena nodded slowly, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. She stood, moved to the sleeping platform. But before she lay down, she turned back. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I think Sarah would be proud of you. Caleb didn't respond. Couldn't respond. He sat by the fire long after Elena had fallen asleep, staring into the flames, thinking about the past and the future and the fragile present that held them both. The next morning brought the first real thaw. The sun rose bright and warm, and by midday water was running off the roof in steady streams. Caleb went outside to assess the damage and found the trails already clearing. Another week, maybe 2, and travel would be possible again. The clock was ticking. He spent the day hunting, ranging farther than he had in weeks. He needed to restock their supplies, needed to prepare for whatever came next. He shot a mule deer in the late afternoon, field-dressed it, and hauled it back to the cabin as the sun was setting. Elena met him at the door, her face pale. What's wrong? He asked immediately. Nothing. I saw smoke earlier, to the south, maybe 3 miles out. Caleb felt his blood run cold. "You're sure?" "Yes." It was thin, barely visible.
This story was posted
was
on the
there.
channel west of
He
Betrayal.
pushed past her into
Please
the
do not
cabin,
repost
set down the
it in
deer,
any
grabbed
form.
his rifle and spyglass. "Stay inside, lock the door." Caleb, but he was already gone, moving through the snow with the speed and silence of long practice. He climbed to a ridge that overlooked the southern approach, found a sheltered spot, and glassed the valley below. At first he saw nothing, just snow and trees and the long shadows of evening. Then, just as Elena had said, he spotted it. A thin thread of smoke rising from a copse of pines about 3 miles south. Someone had made camp. Could be trappers. Could be prospectors who'd gotten lost. Could be completely innocent. Or it could be Shaw's men. Caleb watched until full dark, memorizing the location, looking for any sign of movement. He saw none. Whoever they were being careful. When he returned to the cabin, Elena was waiting by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. "Well?" she asked. "Someone's down there. I couldn't see how many or who they are. It's them. It has to be. We don't know that. Who else would be out here? In winter? This far from any trail?" Caleb had no answer for that. She was right. The location was suspicious. Too close to be coincidence, too remote to be accidental. "All right," he said, setting down his rifle. "We prepare for the worst. I'm going to move some supplies to the cache, just in case. If anyone comes, we need a fallback position." "How long do we have?" "If they know about this cabin, they could be here by tomorrow. If they're just searching the area, we might have a few days." Elena's hand moved to her belly. "And if they come?" Caleb looked at her fear, her determination, the life she was carrying, and he made a decision. "Then I'll handle it," he said. The next 2 days were a study in controlled tension. Caleb fortified the cabin as best he could, moved the spare ammunition to easy reach, reinforced the door, cut firing ports in the shutters. He showed Elena how to load and fire the rifle, where to take cover if shooting started, how to escape through the back window if necessary. She learned quickly, her hands steady, despite her fear. At night, they took turns keeping watch. Caleb would wake to find Elena sitting by the window, staring out at the darkness, and he'd know she was thinking about Thomas, about Shaw, about all the ways this could go wrong. During the day, life continued with surreal normalcy. Elena cooked, Caleb hunted. They spoke little, conserving their words for things that mattered. On the third day, the smoke disappeared. Caleb glassed the southern valley and found nothing. No fire, no movement, no sign anyone had ever been there. Either they'd moved on or they'd gotten closer. "What does it mean?" Elena asked when he told her. "Could mean they gave up. Could mean they're circling around." "You don't believe they gave up?" "No, I don't." That night, Caleb lay awake listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind in the pines, the creak of branches under snow, the distant howl of wolves. Every sound was a potential threat now, every shadow a possible danger. He must have dozed eventually because he woke to Elena shaking his shoulder, her hand over his mouth to keep him quiet. Her eyes were wide in the darkness. Caleb sat up slowly, reached for his rifle. Elena pointed to the window. At first he heard nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving carefully through the snow. Caleb moved to the window, peered through a gap in the shutters. The moon was bright enough to see by, and what he saw made his chest tighten. 3 riders moving in a loose formation toward the cabin. They were still a quarter-mile out, taking their time, probably watching for signs of life. Shaw's men. Had to be. Had to. Caleb turned to Elena. "Pack only what you can carry," he whispered. "Food, blankets, the letters. We leave in 5 minutes." "Where?" "The cache. It's defendable and they don't know about it. Move." Elena obeyed without question, gathering supplies with shaking hands. Caleb loaded his rifle, checked his revolver, stuffed extra ammunition in his pockets. His mind was racing through options. They couldn't outrun mounted men, not with Elena in her condition, but they could hide, could wait them out, could... A voice called out from the darkness. "Hello, the cabin. We mean no harm. Just looking for shelter." Caleb froze. Elena looked at him, terrified. The voice came again, closer now. "We know someone's in there. We saw your smoke earlier. We just need a warm place to rest." It was a lie. Had to be. But what if it wasn't? What if Caleb was wrong? He moved to the door, called back. State your business. Like I said, friend, just looking for shelter. 3 of us, traveling to Leadville, got caught in the storm. Storm ended 3 days ago. A pause. Then a different voice, harder. We're coming in anyway. You can let us in peaceful, or we can make this difficult. Caleb's finger moved to the trigger. You take one more step and I'll put a bullet through your chest. Another pause. Then the sound of guns being drawn. Wrong answer, the hard voice said. Caleb turned to Elena. Go, now, out the back window. Head north to the cache. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'll find you. I can't leave you. Go. He shoved her toward the window, then moved to the firing port in the front shutter. The riders had dismounted now, taking cover behind trees. Caleb could see 3 of them, maybe a 4th in the shadows. Professional, careful. One of them called out again. We just want the woman. Send her out and we'll leave you alone. So it was confirmed. Shaw's men. She's not here, Caleb shouted back. We tracked her for 2 weeks. We know she's inside. Then you tracked wrong. A shot rang out, punching through the shutter 6 inches from Caleb's head. He dropped, returned fire, heard someone curse in the darkness. Behind him, he heard Elena struggling with the window, heard it finally slide open. Good. She was getting out. More shots now, systematic, aimed to pin him down. Caleb fired back, conserving ammunition, trying to buy time. Then he heard it, Elena's scream cut short. Caleb spun around. The back window was empty, but he could hear voices outside, rough and triumphant. They'd flanked him. While he was focused on the front, someone had circled around. Rage flooded through him, white hot and pure. He grabbed his rifle, kicked open the front door, and charged into the night. The men at the front scattered, surprised by the sudden aggression. Caleb fired twice, saw one man go down, then he was around the side of the cabin. 2 men had Elena. One had his hand over her mouth, the other was trying to tie her wrists. They turned as Caleb appeared, one reaching for his gun. Caleb shot him in the chest. The man fell backward into the snow. The second man released Elena, pulled his own weapon, but Elena drove her elbow into his gut, and he doubled over. Caleb closed the distance, smashed the rifle butt into his skull. The man collapsed. Are you hurt? Caleb demanded, grabbing Elena's arm. No, A shot cracked past his ear. Caleb spun, saw the remaining men from the front converging on their position. 2 of them, guns drawn. Into the trees, he shouted, pulling Elena with him. They ran, or tried to, Elena's pregnancy slowing them, the snow dragging at their feet. Bullets kicked up powder around them. Caleb fired back blindly, just trying to keep the men's heads down. They made it into the tree line, took cover behind a fallen log. Caleb was breathing hard, his mind working frantically. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and Elena couldn't run much farther. Listen to me, he said, reloading quickly. When I start shooting, you head north, straight line. The cache is maybe a mile. You'll see a lightning-struck pine with a white blaze. The cave is just past it. You understand? Caleb, I can't. You can and you will, for your baby. He looked at her, and something in his expression must have convinced her because she nodded. Caleb waited until he heard the men approaching, then stood and fired 3 rapid shots. One man screamed, the others dove for cover. Go, he shouted. Elena ran. Caleb kept firing, drawing the men's attention, leading them away from her path. He could hear them cursing, coordinating, trying to flank him. He fell back deeper into the trees, using terrain he knew by heart to stay ahead of them. A bullet clipped his shoulder, burned like fire. He ignored it, kept moving. Another shot, closer. He returned fire, heard someone grunt, and then his rifle clicked empty. Caleb drew his revolver, but he knew it was over. 3 shots left, 2 men still coming. He'd bought Elena maybe 10 minutes, hoped it was enough. He crouched behind a boulder waiting for the end, and then he heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze. Elena screaming his name, not in fear, in pain. The scream cut through the night like a blade through flesh, and Caleb was moving before conscious thought could stop him. The 2 remaining gunmen forgotten, the bullet wound in his shoulder irrelevant, every instinct that had kept him alive for 15 years of mountain survival screaming at him to run toward that sound instead of away from it. He crashed through the underbrush, revolver raised, expecting to find Shaw's men dragging Elena away. What he found instead
This story
stopped
was
him
posted
cold.
on the channel
Elena
west
was
of
on her
Betrayal.
knees in the snow.
Please do
both
not
hands
repost
pressed
it
to her
in
belly,
any form.
her face twisted in agony. And standing over her, hands raised in a gesture of peace, was a man Caleb had never seen before. He was young, maybe 30, dressed in a heavy coat with a prison guard's badge still pinned to the chest. His face was gaunt, exhausted, and when he saw Caleb's gun, he didn't reach for his own weapon. He just stood there, waiting. "Don't shoot," the man said quietly. "I'm not with them. I came to help." Caleb kept the revolver trained on his chest. "Who the hell are you?" "My name's Marcus Webb. I was a guard at Cannon City. I'm the one who sent Mrs. Ward the letter about her husband." Elena gasped, her pain momentarily forgotten. "You're dead. They said you fell." "They say a lot of things that aren't true." Marcus glanced behind him toward the sounds of men moving through the trees. "We need to move. Now. Those men will regroup in minutes." "Why should I trust you?" Caleb demanded. "Because if I wanted her dead, I wouldn't have spent 3 weeks tracking her through a blizzard to warn her." Marcus moved toward Elena, slowly, his hands still visible. "Mrs. Ward, can you walk?" "I don't. Something's wrong." Elena's voice was tight with pain. "It hurts." "It's not supposed to hurt like this yet." Caleb was beside her in an instant, holstering his revolver, getting an arm under her shoulders. "How far along are you?" 36 weeks, maybe 37. "The baby's not due for—" She cried out again, doubling over. Marcus swore under his breath. "We can't stay here. Is there somewhere close? Somewhere defensible?" Caleb's mind raced. The cache was too far. Elena couldn't make it. Not like this. The cabin was compromised. That left only one option. "There's an old mine shaft, 1/4 mile west. It's not much, but it's shelter." "Lead the way." They moved as quickly as Elena's condition allowed, Caleb supporting most of her weight, Marcus covering their rear with a rifle he'd apparently brought with him. Behind them, they could hear Shaw's men calling to each other, organizing, getting closer. The mine entrance was little more than a crack in a hillside, half hidden by deadfall and 50 years of neglect. Caleb had discovered it his second year in the mountains and had used it once or twice as emergency shelter. It went back maybe 30 feet before narrowing to nothing, but it was dry and the opening could be defended. They got Elena inside just as another contraction hit. She grabbed Caleb's arm hard enough to leave bruises, her breathing sharp and shallow. "It's too soon," she gasped. "It's too soon." "Babies come when they come," Marcus said, pulling branches across the entrance to hide it. "My sister had her first at 35 weeks. Healthy as a horse now." Caleb lit the small lantern he kept stashed in the mine, the flame casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. In the dim light, Elena looked terrifyingly pale, her face sheened with sweat despite the cold. "How far apart are the pains?" he asked. "I don't know. 10 minutes? Less?" She looked up at him, fear naked in her eyes. "Caleb, I don't know how to do this. Thomas and I we didn't plan." "Breathe," he told her, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "Just breathe." Marcus was at the entrance, peering through the branches. "They're still searching, can't tell how many. At least 2, maybe 3, if the one you shot isn't dead." "Tell me why you're here," Caleb said, not taking his eyes off Elena. "The real reason." Marcus turned, and in the lantern light his face looked older than his years. "Because Thomas Ward is dying, and he deserves to see his wife before he goes. And because what Shaw did to him, what Shaw's still doing, it's wrong, and someone needs to stop it." "You're risking your life for principle?" "I'm risking my life because I already lost everything else. Shaw found out I sent that letter, had me beaten half to death and fired. When I went to the marshal to file charges, they laughed me out of the office. Shaw owns this whole territory, Mr. Harlan. Owns the courts, the law, the land office. The only thing he doesn't own is the truth, and I intend to make sure it gets told." Elena's breathing had eased slightly. She was listening, her hand still gripping Caleb's. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I didn't. I found him." Marcus nodded toward Caleb. "Or rather, I found rumors of a hermit living in these mountains. Asked around Leadville, got a general direction, started searching. Figured if you were smart, you'd have gone somewhere no one could follow. When I saw smoke from a cabin that wasn't on any map, I knew I'd found the right place. And Shaw's men? They found me first. I was camped 2 days south when 3 of them rode in asking questions. I told them I was a trapper, but they didn't believe me. Had to kill one of them to get away. He touched a darkening bruise on his jaw. The other 2 chased me north. I've been leading them in circles for days, trying to lose them. Didn't mean to bring them to your door. But you did, Caleb said flatly. Yes, and I'm sorry for that. But Mrs. Ward needs to know her husband is innocent. Completely, provably innocent, and he's dying. Elena's head came up sharply. What? Marcus pulled an envelope from inside his coat, handled it carefully like something precious. This came for you 3 days ago. The prison doctor tried to send it, but Shaw intercepted it. I stole it from his office before I left. Elena took the letter with shaking hands, broke the seal. In the flickering light, Caleb watched her face as she read, watched hope and grief and something like rage chase each other across her features. When she finished, she was crying. What does it say? Caleb asked gently. Thomas has consumption, advanced. The doctor says he has weeks at most. Her voice broke. He wants to see me, to see the baby. He says he has evidence, documents he hid before the trial, proof of everything Shaw did. Marcus nodded. It's true. He told me where they're hidden. A bank vault in Denver, under a false name. But he won't give up the name until he sees you. Says it's the only leverage he has left to keep you safe. Safe? Elena laughed bitterly. Look where we are. Look what's happening. Because Shaw got nervous. He heard rumors you were pregnant, figured you might try to contact Thomas, so he sent his best men to make sure that never happens. Marcus met her eyes. But if we can get you to Cannon City, if Thomas turns over that evidence to someone who isn't in Shaw's pocket, a federal marshal maybe, or a territorial judge, it's over. Shaw goes to prison. Thomas's name gets cleared. You and your baby get your lives back. If, Caleb said. That's a lot of ifs. It's the only chance any of us have. Elena looked down at the letter, at Thomas's handwriting. Shaky now, weakened by illness, but still recognizably his. Cannon City is 200 miles from here, through winter mountain passes, with Shaw's men hunting us, and I'm about to give birth. Not ideal, Marcus admitted. It's insane. Maybe, but what's the alternative? Hide here until Shaw finds you? Run for the rest of your life? Your husband is dying, Mrs. Ward. He sacrificed everything to protect you. Don't you think he deserves to see what he was protecting? The words hung in the cold air. Outside, they could hear men moving through the trees, getting closer. A voice called out, rough and angry. I know you're out there, woman. Make this easy on yourself. Come out now and maybe we'll let your friend live. Caleb moved to the entrance, peered through the branches. He could see torches now, 2 of them, moving in a search pattern. The men were maybe 100 yards away and closing. We can't stay here, he said quietly. They'll find us by dawn. Then we run, Marcus said. She can barely walk. Then we carry her. 200 miles? If that's what it takes. Caleb turned to look at Elena. She was sitting against the wall, one hand on her belly, the other clutching Thomas's letter. In the lantern light, she looked young and old at the same time, worn down by fear and hardship, but not yet broken. It's your choice, he told her. I can get you out of here tonight, lead you north into country so rough those men will never follow. Find you a place to hide until the baby comes. You'll be safe. But Thomas will die alone, Elena said softly. Yes. And Shaw will go free. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it inside her dress, close to her heart. I spent 2 years visiting my husband in prison, she said. Every month, like clockwork. It was a 4-hour journey each way, and I never missed once. You know what he talked about every time? Caleb shook his head. Not the injustice, not Shaw or the trial or how he'd been betrayed. He talked about the future, about what we'd do when he got out, the farm we'd buy, the children we'd have, the life we'd build. He kept me hoping, kept me believing that it would all be worth it in the end. Her voice hardened. I will not let him die thinking I gave up. I will not let our child grow up with a father who sacrificed everything for nothing. You understand what you're choosing, Caleb said. The danger.
This story was posted
odd.
on the channel west of Betrayal.
I understand
Please
that
do
I've
not
been running for
repost it
months
in
and
any
I'm tired
form.
of it. I understand that my husband is dying and I want to see his face one more time. I understand that Shaw needs to pay for what he's done. She looked up at Caleb and her eyes were fierce. So yes, I'm choosing the hard road. I'm choosing to fight. Marcus smiled, grim but genuine. Mrs. Ward, I think your husband chose well. Another contraction hit then, stronger than the last. Elena gasped, curled forward, riding it out. When it passed, she was breathing hard. How long between pains now? Caleb asked. 8 minutes? Maybe 7. Then we don't have much time. He turned to Marcus. You have horses? 1. Hidden about a mile south. Not enough. We'll need at least 2, probably 3. Caleb thought fast, running through options. Shaw's men have horses. We take theirs. There's still at least 2 of them out there, probably armed with repeating rifles. How do you propose we take their horses? Caleb checked the rounds left in his revolver. 3. Not enough for a straight fight. But then, he'd spent 15 years in these mountains learning that straight fights were for fools. I know this terrain, he said. Every ridge, every drainage, every game trail. They don't. We use that. They'll be expecting an ambush. They're expecting us to run, so we do the opposite. Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. You've got a plan. The start of one. You any good with that rifle? Good enough. Then here's what we do. Caleb laid it out quickly, simply. Marcus would take Elena deeper into the mine, stay hidden, keep her safe. Caleb would circle around, hit Shaw's men from an unexpected angle, create chaos. In the confusion, he'd take their horses and weapons. Then they'd ride hard for Marcus's horse, consolidate their resources, and get as far from this valley as possible before dawn. It was desperate. It was dangerous. It relied on luck and timing and a dozen things outside his control. It was also their only chance. You're going alone? Elena asked, her hand finding his. I work better alone. Caleb, this is what I'm good at, Elena. Surviving. Let me do it. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Come back. I will. He didn't know if it was a promise he could keep, but he said it anyway. Caleb slipped out of the mine into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving Marcus and Elena behind. The voices of Shaw's men echoed through the trees, closer now, more confident. They thought they had their quarry trapped. They were about to learn otherwise. Moving silently through terrain he'd walked 1,000 times, Caleb circled wide, using the contours of the land to stay hidden. He could see the torches now, 2 men, just as he'd thought, working methodically through the forest. Their horses were tied 100 yards back, visible in the moonlight. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was splitting up. One man was moving east, the other west, trying to cover more ground. It meant Caleb could take them one at a time. He found a position above the eastern man's path, behind a fallen tree, and waited. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. Right now he needed focus. The man came closer, torch held high, rifle in his other hand. He was young, maybe 25, with the swagger of someone who'd never really been hurt. He walked like the forest owed him passage. That was mistake number 3. When the man was 10 feet away, Caleb stood up and shot him in the leg. The man screamed, dropped the torch, went down hard. Caleb was on him before he could bring the rifle around, slamming the butt of his revolver into the man's temple. The man went limp. Caleb took his rifle, his ammunition, his knife. Then he grabbed the torch and sprinted toward where the horses were tied, making no effort at stealth now. He heard the other man shout, heard boots crashing through the underbrush. Good. That's what he wanted. The horses were nervous, eyes rolling at the commotion. Caleb cut the tie ropes, fired his revolver into the air. The horses bolted, scattering in 3 different directions. The second man burst into the clearing, rifle raised. He saw Caleb and fired, the shot going wide. Caleb dove behind a tree, returned fire with the rifle he'd taken. The man ducked, moved to better cover. They traded shots for maybe 30 seconds, neither willing to expose himself for a clear target. But Caleb wasn't trying to kill him, he was just buying time. When he heard the horses had run far enough, he turned and sprinted back toward the mine. Behind him, the man shouted curses, fired wildly, but he didn't pursue. Not on foot, not in darkness, not in terrain that could kill him. Caleb made it back to the mine entrance, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen small cuts. Marcus had his rifle trained on the entrance, relaxed when he saw who it was. Did it work? They've lost their horses. One man's wounded, the other's pinned down. We have maybe an hour before they regroup. Then we need to move now. They helped Elena to her feet. She was pale, trembling, but she could walk. Barely. How far to your horse? Caleb asked Marcus. A mile, due south. Can you find it in the dark? I can try. They moved out, Caleb leading, Marcus supporting Elena, moving as quickly as her condition allowed. Every few minutes, another contraction would hit, and they'd have to stop, wait for it to pass, then continue. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached Marcus's camp. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, was right where he'd left it, tied and waiting. Marcus also had supplies, food, blankets, ammunition, a canteen of whiskey for medicine. Not enough for 3 people in 200 miles, Caleb observed. It's what we have. Elena was leaning against a tree, her face drawn. The contractions are closer now. 5 minutes, maybe less. Caleb and Marcus exchanged looks. We can't outrun this, Marcus said quietly. The baby's coming. Not here. Too exposed. Caleb scanned the area, thinking. There was an old hunter's shelter about 2 miles northeast, barely more than a lean-to, but it would provide some protection. There's a place. We can make it if we're fast. I can ride, Elena said, pushing herself off the tree. I can do this. They got her on the horse, Marcus climbing up behind to steady her. Caleb led the way on foot, moving at a pace that made his wounded shoulder scream but kept them ahead of any pursuit. They reached the shelter just as the sun cleared the mountains. It was exactly as Caleb remembered. 3 walls of logs, a roof of pine boughs, a ring of stones for a fire. Crude, but it would do. They got Elena inside, laid her down on blankets Marcus spread out. Her contractions were coming every 3 minutes now, hard and fast. It's happening, she gasped. The baby's coming. Caleb felt ice flood through his veins. He was suddenly back in Missouri, 16 years ago, finding Sarah cold and the baby blue and knowing he'd failed them both. Caleb, Marcus's voice was sharp. I need you here. Now. I don't know how. Neither do I. But she needs us, so we figure it out. Marcus gripped his shoulder, the wounded one, pain snapping Caleb back to the present. You survived 15 years alone in these mountains. You just stole horses from armed men in the dark. You can do this. Elena cried out, her back arching, and Caleb made a choice. Not to run from his fear, but to face it. Not to let the past dictate the present. To be here, now, for someone who needed him. All right, he said. Tell me what to do. For the next 4 hours, time became something else entirely. A series of moments strung together by pain and fear and desperate hope. Marcus boiled water, tore cloth for bandages, held Elena's hand and told her she was doing great, that she was strong, that it would be over soon. Caleb stayed at the other end, watching for signs of trouble, ready to help in whatever way he could, even though he had no idea what he was doing. Elena pushed and screamed and cried and pushed again. The sun climbed higher, the temperature rose, and somewhere in the distance, maybe real or maybe imagined, Caleb thought he heard horses. I can see the head, Marcus said, his voice tight with something like wonder. Elena, one more push, one more, and Elena screamed, a sound of pure effort and pain and determination. And then, suddenly, there was another sound. Silence. The baby had come, but it wasn't crying. Caleb felt his heart stop. Not again. Not this. Not after everything. Marcus was holding the infant, a tiny, still form, its skin too pale, lips tinged blue. He was doing something, rubbing its back, clearing its mouth, his movements frantic. Come on, Marcus whispered. Come on, breathe, breathe. Nothing. Elena was sobbing. Is it? Please tell me. Caleb moved without thinking, took the baby from Marcus's hands. It was so small, so impossibly fragile. A girl. perfect in every way except that she wasn't breathing. He remembered Sarah telling him once, when they talked about having children, that sometimes babies needed help, that sometimes they forgot to start. Caleb turned the infant over, supported her head,
This
and
story
tapped her
was
back
posted
firmly,
on the channel
the way you
West
tap
of
a barrel
Betrayal.
to get the last of
Please
the
do
water
not
out.
repost it
Still
in any
nothing.
form.
He did it again, harder. The baby gasped, and then she cried. It was the most beautiful sound Caleb had ever heard, angry and loud and absolutely, perfectly alive. He wrapped her in a blanket, turned to Elena, placed the baby in her arms. Elena was crying and laughing at the same time, holding her daughter like she might disappear if she loosened her grip even slightly. "She's perfect," Elena whispered. "She's perfect." Marcus slumped back against the wall, his face pale, hands shaking. For a moment, I thought, "I know," Caleb said. "So did I." They sat in silence for a moment, just breathing, just being alive. The baby's cries had faded to small, snuffling sounds. Elena was stroking her daughter's head with one finger, murmuring soft words. And then they heard it, clear and unmistakable. Horses. Multiple horses, coming fast. Caleb was at the entrance before the sound of hoofbeats had fully registered, rifle in hand, Marcus right behind him. Through the trees they could see dust rising, multiple riders moving fast from the south. Too many to be just Shaw's 2 remaining men. "Reinforcements," Marcus said quietly. "Shaw must have sent more." Elena clutched the baby tighter, her face draining of what little color it had left. "How many?" Caleb counted silently. 5 riders, maybe 6. All armed, moving with military precision. These weren't hired thugs, these were professionals. "We can't fight them," he said. "Not here. Not like this." "Then we run," Marcus said. "She just gave birth. She can't ride." "Then you take her and the baby. I'll hold them off, buy you time." "That's suicide." "It's the only play we have." Marcus checked his rifle, his hand steady despite the death sentence he'd just pronounced on himself. "Get her to Cannon City. Make sure Thomas sees his daughter. Make sure Shaw pays." Marcus, no," Elena started, but another sound cut her off. A voice, amplified somehow, carrying across the valley. "Mrs. Ward, my name is Captain Garrett Shaw. I believe we have some business to discuss." Caleb's jaw tightened. Shaw himself had come. That changed everything. "I know you can hear me," Shaw called. "I know you've just given birth. My men heard the baby crying. So let me make you an offer. Come out now peacefully, and I give you my word no harm will come to you or your child." "He's lying," Marcus said flatly. "Of course he's lying," Caleb agreed. "Question is, what does he want?" Elena was struggling to sit up, wincing with the effort. "He wants the evidence. Thomas told him I knew where it was hidden. That's the only reason I'm still alive." "Do you know where it is?" "No, Thomas never told me. He said it was safer that way." Shaw's voice came again, closer now. "I'm going to count to 60, Mrs. Ward. If you're not out here by then, my men are coming in, and I cannot guarantee their restraint." Caleb's mind raced through scenarios, options, angles. Every one of them ended badly. They were pinned down, outnumbered, with a woman who could barely stand and a newborn who needed care. Running was impossible. Fighting was suicide. Surrender meant death, just slower. Unless. "Marcus," he said quietly, "that evidence Thomas hid. You said it's in a bank vault in Denver?" "Yes, under a false name." "And only Thomas knows the name?" "As far as I know." Caleb turned to Elena. "Shaw doesn't know that Thomas never told you. He thinks you have the information." "So?" "So that's leverage. As long as Shaw thinks you can lead him to the evidence, he needs you alive." Elena's eyes widened. "You want me to make a deal with him?" "I want you to buy us time." Caleb moved to the entrance, looked out at the mounted men forming a perimeter around the shelter. Shaw sat in the center, tall and straight in the saddle, his uniform immaculate despite the journey. Even from here, Caleb could see the calculation in his eyes. 40 seconds, Mrs. Ward," Shaw called. "What kind of time are we buying?" Marcus asked. "Enough to get to Cannon City, to get Elena to Thomas before Shaw realizes she doesn't know anything. And then? Then Thomas gives up the evidence to someone who matters, Federal marshal, territorial judge, a newspaper. I don't care. Someone Shaw can't buy or threaten. And this ends. Marcus nodded slowly. It could work. If we can get her there. If Shaw doesn't kill us all first. He won't. Not if he thinks we're cooperating. You're gambling with all our lives, Caleb. You have a better idea? Marcus didn't. None of them did. 20 seconds. Shaw's voice held a note of impatience now. Caleb turned to Elena. Can you do this? Can you look him in the eye and lie? Elena looked down at her daughter, then back up at Caleb. When she spoke, her voice was steel. I've spent 2 years lying to myself that everything would be all right. I can lie to Shaw. Then here's what you tell him. You'll take him to the evidence, but only after you've seen Thomas. That's the deal. Non-negotiable. He'll never agree to that. He will, because he's smart enough to know that if he kills you before he gets what he wants, the evidence stays hidden forever, and eventually someone will find it. 10 seconds! Caleb helped Elena to her feet, steadied her as she swayed. The baby had gone quiet, as if sensing the danger. Marcus positioned himself behind them, rifle ready but not raised. Let me do the talking, Caleb said. And remember, we have something he wants. That makes us valuable. As long as we're valuable, we're alive. 5, 4, 3. We're coming out, Caleb shouted. Don't shoot. 2, 1, time's up, Mrs. Shaw's count stopped. What did you say? We're coming out, unarmed. We want to talk. There was a pause. Then Shaw's voice, measured and careful. Step out slowly. Hands visible. Any sudden moves and my men will fire. Caleb went first, hands raised, rifle left behind. Marcus followed, then Elena cradling the baby against her chest. They emerged from the shelter into the morning sunlight, squinting against the brightness. Shaw's men had formed a semicircle, rifles trained on them. Caleb counted 6, plus Shaw. Bad odds, but not as bad as they could have been. Shaw himself dismounted, walked forward with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a fight. He was in his 50s, Caleb guessed, with silver hair and the kind of face that would look trustworthy in a courtroom, but his eyes were cold, calculating. The eyes of a man who saw people as assets or obstacles, nothing more. Mrs. Ward, Shaw said, his voice smooth as oil. We finally meet. I've heard so much about you from your husband. Elena said nothing, just stared at him with barely controlled hatred. Shaw's gaze moved to the baby. And this must be the child Thomas was so worried about. A daughter, I presume. What do you want, Shaw? Elena's voice was hoarse but steady. The same thing I've wanted all along. The location of certain documents your husband stole from me. Give me that information, and I'll let you walk away. You have my word as an officer. Your word means nothing. Perhaps, but it's all you have at the moment. Shaw's smile never reached his eyes. So, where are the documents? I'll tell you, but only after I see Thomas. Shaw's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I'm afraid that's not possible. Your husband is gravely ill. The journey to Cannon City would take days, and you're clearly in no condition. Then you should have thought of that before you chased me through the mountains. Elena took a step forward, and despite her exhaustion, despite having given birth an hour ago, she radiated defiance. Here are my terms. You take me to Thomas. I see him, I say goodbye, and then I'll tell you everything you want to know. Refuse and the evidence stays hidden. Forever. You're bluffing. You don't know where it is. Then call my bluff. Kill me now. See what happens to your empire when those documents surface in 5 years, or 10, or 20. Shaw studied her for a long moment. Caleb could see him calculating, weighing options, trying to determine if she was telling the truth. Finally, Shaw said, Even if I agreed, the journey would be difficult. You've just given birth. The child is fragile. You wouldn't survive. Let me worry about that. And these men? Shaw gestured to Caleb and Marcus. What role do they play? They're my protection. They come with me. Absolutely not. I'm not traveling with armed men who've already killed several of my employees. Employees, Marcus said, speaking for the first time. Is that what you're calling murderers now? Shaw's eyes shifted to him, and recognition dawned. Ah, The prison guard, Marcus Webb. I wondered what happened to you after you stole my property. Your property was a letter to a woman about her dying husband.
This story was
I'd say that
posted on
makes
the
it
channel
hers,
west
not
of
yours.
Betrayal. Please do not
Semantics.
repost it in any
Shaw
form.
turned back to Elena. Here's my counteroffer. I take you to Cannon City, alone. The men stay here. Once you've seen Thomas and given me the information, I'll send word that they can go free. So you can kill them the moment we're gone? No. Then we're at an impasse. The baby chose that moment to cry, a thin, wavering sound that cut through the tension like a knife. Elena rocked her gently, murmuring soft words, but the baby wouldn't be soothed. She was hungry, cold, overwhelmed by a world she'd entered too soon. Shaw watched this with the detachment of someone observing a mildly interesting insect. The child needs proper care, medical attention, things you cannot provide in the wilderness. She needs her mother. That's what I'm providing. Mrs. Ward, be reasonable. You're bargaining from a position of weakness. I have 6 armed men. You have a hermit and a disgraced prison guard, both exhausted, one wounded. I could take what I want by force. You could try, Caleb said quietly, but you'd have to explain to your investors why the only person who knows where their money is happens to be dead. Shaw's eyes narrowed. You're awfully bold for someone who's about to die. I've been about to die for 15 years. Hasn't happened yet. Then perhaps today is the day. Perhaps. Caleb took a step forward, putting himself between Shaw and Elena. But here's what you're not considering. Right now, you have a chance to get what you want peacefully. We take Mrs. Ward to Cannon City. She sees her husband. She tells you what you need to know. Everyone walks away. It takes a few days, but you get your evidence back and we get to keep breathing. That's not a bad deal. And if I simply shoot you now and extract the information from Mrs. Ward through other means, then you're gambling that she knows more than she's said, that she won't lie to you out of spite, even under torture, that the information she gives you will be accurate. Caleb held Shaw's gaze. You strike me as a man who doesn't gamble. You plan, you control, you minimize risk. Taking us to Cannon City is the lowest risk option you have. Shaw was silent for a long moment, thinking it through. Caleb could see the calculation happening behind those cold eyes, weighing options, considering angles, trying to find the trap. Finally, Shaw said, Very well. We travel together to Cannon City, but under my conditions. My men accompany us. Any attempt to escape or signal for help, and I kill the child first. Is that understood? Elena's arms tightened around the baby. Understood. Good. We leave in 1 hour. My men will provide horses and supplies. You'll ride in the center of the formation, under constant supervision. And Mr. Harlan, Mr. Webb, you'll surrender your weapons. All of them. That wasn't part of the deal, Marcus said. It is now. Take it or leave it. Caleb met Marcus's eyes, saw the same calculation he was making. They could refuse, could try to fight their way out. But the math was brutal, 7 against 2, with Elena and a newborn caught in the crossfire. We'll surrender our weapons, Caleb said, after we reach Cannon City, not before. That's not acceptable. Then you don't get your evidence. Your choice, Captain. Shaw's jaw tightened. For a moment, Caleb thought he might call for his men to open fire. Then Shaw smiled, cold and humorless. You're quite the negotiator, Mr. Harlan. Very well. You may keep your weapons. But the moment I suspect treachery, this deal is void, and everyone dies. Fair
This
enough,
story
Shaw
was
gestured to
posted
his
on the
men.
channel
To
west of
bring the
Betrayal.
horses.
Please
We
do
have a
not
long journey
repost it
ahead.
in any form.
The next hour passed in tense preparation. Shaw's men brought horses, food, blankets, even a makeshift cradle that could be strapped to Elena's saddle. They worked efficiently, professionally, saying nothing. Caleb recognized the type. Military veterans, probably, men who'd learned to follow orders without question. Marcus pulled Caleb aside while Elena was being helped onto her horse. This is insane, he said quietly. Shaw's going to kill us the moment he gets what he wants. I know. So what's the plan? Get to Cannon City, get Elena to Thomas, hope that something changes before Shaw decides we're not useful anymore. That's not a plan. That's a prayer. You have a better idea? Marcus didn't. They both knew they were walking into a trap with their eyes open. The question was whether they could turn it to their advantage before it closed around them. They rode out as the sun climbed toward noon, a strange procession moving through the mountains. Shaw's men formed a loose perimeter, 2 in front, 2 behind, 1 on each flank. Shaw himself rode beside Elena, occasionally glancing at the baby with an expression Caleb couldn't read. Curiosity, maybe. Or calculation. Elena held up better than Caleb expected. She was pale, clearly in pain, but she stayed upright in the saddle, kept the baby warm and quiet. Every few hours they'd stop to let her rest, to nurse the infant, to tend to the wounds that came with childbirth. Shaw allowed this with surprising patience, as if he understood that pushing too hard would break his leverage. On the second day, as they descended through a narrow canyon, Marcus maneuvered his horse close to Caleb's. "We're being followed," he said quietly. Caleb had noticed it too, a flicker of movement in the rocks above them, the feeling of eyes watching. "How many?" "Can't tell. At least 2, maybe more." "Shaw's men?" "Don't think so. Wrong positioning." Caleb risked a glance at the ridge line. For a moment he saw nothing. Then, there. A figure, silhouetted against the sky for just an instant before disappearing. Native scouts, maybe, or trappers, or someone else entirely. "Should we tell Shaw?" Marcus asked. "And let him know we're paying attention?" "No. We keep quiet. Stay alert." That night they camped in a box canyon with only 1 entrance. Shaw posted guards, built a large fire, made it clear that any attempt to leave would be met with bullets. They ate in silence, salt pork and hardtack, washed down with bitter coffee, while the baby slept fitfully in Elena's arms. Shaw sat across the fire from them, cleaning his revolver with methodical precision. "Tell me something, Mr. Harlan," he said without looking up. "What's your stake in all this? You're clearly not the father. You don't strike me as the romantic type who'd risk his life for a woman he barely knows. So what are you getting out of this arrangement?" "Satisfaction," Caleb said. "Of what sort?" "The kind that comes from watching men like you face consequences." Shaw smiled. "Men like me? You mean successful men? Men who've built something from nothing?" "I mean men who steal from people who can't fight back, who use power to avoid accountability, who think the law doesn't apply to them." "The law is a fiction, Mr. Harlan. It exists to serve those who write it. I simply recognized that truth earlier than most." "And Thomas Ward? What about him?" "Mr. Ward made the mistake of believing that truth mattered more than power. A naive position, but not uncommon among the young and idealistic." Shaw holstered his revolver, looked directly at Caleb. He could have walked away, could have taken a bribe, kept his mouth shut, lived a comfortable life. Instead, he chose principles. And principles, as you can see, don't keep you warm at night. "They keep you able to look in a mirror," Elena said, her voice sharp with contempt. Shaw turned to her. "Do they? Tell me, Mrs. Ward, when you visit your husband in prison, when you see what his principles have cost him, do you thank him? Or do you resent him just a little for choosing honor over happiness?" Elena said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Shaw nodded. "That's what I thought. Thomas Ward is dying because he couldn't accept the world as it is. And you're suffering because of his choice. If that's what principles buy, I'll keep my pragmatism." "You'll keep your guilt, you mean," Marcus said. "The kind that makes you kill guards who show mercy. That makes you hunt pregnant women across mountains." "That's not pragmatism, Shaw. That's cowardice." Shaw's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You should be careful, Mr. Webb. You're only alive because you're useful. That can change very quickly. So can a lot of things." The tension stretched taut, brittle. Then Shaw stood, brushed off his pants, and walked to where his men were standing guard. "He's going to kill us," Elena whispered, "the moment we reach Cannon City." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Maybe not." "How can you be so calm?" "Because being scared won't change anything. We make it to Cannon City, we get you to Thomas, and we deal with whatever comes next." "And if what comes next is Shaw putting a bullet in our heads?" Caleb met her eyes. "Then we make sure he doesn't get the evidence first." The third day brought them into the foothills, the mountains falling away behind them as the land flattened toward civilization. They passed abandoned mining camps, saw distant smoke from ranches, heard the whistle of a train somewhere to the east. Cannon City was close now, less than a day's ride. Shaw became more watchful as they traveled.
This
his
story
men
was
tighter
posted on the
information.
channel west
They were
of
approaching
Betrayal.
his territory now,
Please do not
places where he had
repost it
influence,
in any
where
form.
people knew his name. It should have made him more confident. Instead, he seemed uneasy. That evening, as they made camp near a creek, Caleb noticed Shaw having a heated conversation with one of his men, a lean, scarred man who seemed to be his lieutenant. Shaw was gesturing sharply, his face tight with anger. The lieutenant nodded, said something too quiet to hear, then moved to check the perimeter. "Something's wrong," Marcus said, watching the exchange. "Shaw's losing control of something. Question is what?" They found out an hour later when the lieutenant returned with news that made Shaw's face go white. "There's a federal marshal in Cannon City," the lieutenant said quietly. "Arrived 3 days ago. He's asking questions about land fraud. Someone tipped him off." Shaw was very still. "Who?" "Don't know, but he's got a court order. He's been reviewing prison records, talking to inmates. He spoke with Ward." Caleb felt something like hope flicker in his chest. A federal marshal, asking the right questions at the right time. It couldn't be coincidence. Shaw turned to Elena, his eyes hard. "Did you do this? Did you contact the authorities before you ran?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me. How did a federal marshal know to investigate me now, of all times?" "Maybe your crimes finally caught up with you." Shaw grabbed her arm, yanked her close. The baby started crying. "Tell me the truth, or I'll—" Caleb's rifle was at Shaw's temple before the threat could be completed. "Let her go." Shaw froze. Around them, his men raised their weapons, but nobody fired. The situation had gone from tense to lethal in the space of a heartbeat. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Harlan. You're the one making mistakes. Let her go. Now." Shaw released Elena, stepped back slowly. "This changes nothing. We continue to Cannon City. Mrs. Ward tells me where the evidence is hidden. Then we all part ways. With a federal marshal waiting, you really think that's going to work?" "I think you have no idea what you're dealing with. That marshal is 2 days away from having an unfortunate accident. His investigation will be closed as incomplete, and everything goes back to normal. Unless the evidence reaches him first," Marcus said. Shaw's smile was pure ice. "Which is why we're going to collect it tonight, before the marshal knows to look for it. Thomas won't give up the name until Elena sees him. Then we'll visit him tonight, quietly, before anyone knows we're in town." Caleb lowered his rifle slowly. "You're talking about breaking into a prison. I'm talking about visiting an inmate. I still have friends on the inside, guards who remember which side their bread is buttered on." Shaw's confidence was returning now, his mind already working through the new plan. "We go in after midnight. Elena sees Thomas. He gives us the name. We collect the evidence and leave before dawn. The marshal wakes up to find his key witness dead and his investigation dead with it." "You're going to kill Thomas," Elena said, her voice hollow. "I'm going to tie up a loose end. It's nothing personal, Mrs. Ward, just business. I won't help you." "Yes, you will. Because if you don't, I'll kill your daughter right now. And you'll watch." The baby was still crying, a thin wail that cut through the night. Elena looked down at her daughter, then at Shaw, and Caleb saw her break, saw the moment when the fight went out of her and left only despair. "All right," she whispered. "I'll do it. Just don't hurt her, please." Shaw nodded, satisfied. "A wise choice. Now everyone get some rest. We have a long night ahead of us." They rode into Cannon City
This
under
story
cover
was
of
posted
darkness.
on the channel
Shaw's
west
men
of
silent
Betrayal.
as ghosts.
Please
the whole
do not
group moving
repost
like a
it in any
military
form.
operation. The town was quiet, most windows dark, only a few lanterns burning in the saloons and hotels. The prison sat on the northern edge, a squat stone building that looked more like a fortress than a place of rehabilitation. Shaw had been right about still having friends inside. A guard met them at a side entrance, unlocked a heavy door, and led them through corridors that smelled of sweat and despair. They passed cells where men slept or stared at nothing, their faces hollow with time and hopelessness. Thomas Ward's cell was at the end of a long hallway. The guard unlocked it, stepped back, let Elena enter first. Caleb and Marcus followed, Shaw right behind them, his hand resting casually on his revolver. Thomas was sitting on the edge of his cot, waiting. He looked like a different man from the one in the photograph Elena had shown Caleb weeks ago. That man had been young, hopeful, strong. This man was a shell,
skin stretched over bone, eyes sunken, his breathing labored and wet.
Consumption was eating him from the inside out. But when he saw Elena, when he saw the baby in her arms, something changed. Life came back into his eyes. He stood slowly, painfully, and reached for them. "Elena," he whispered, "you came. I didn't think, I wasn't sure." "I'm here," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm here, and I brought someone who wants to meet you." She placed the baby in his arms, and Thomas Ward started to cry. Thomas Ward held his daughter like she was made of glass, his skeletal fingers trembling as he traced the curve of her tiny face. Tears ran freely down his cheeks, disappearing into the hollow spaces where flesh had once been. He looked at Elena, then at the baby, then back again, as if trying to memorize every detail before time ran out. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his labored breathing. "What's her name?" Elena's own tears were falling now. "I haven't named her yet. I wanted to wait. I thought maybe you could—" "Sarah," Thomas said immediately, "after my mother, if that's all right with you." Elena nodded, unable to speak. Shaw cleared his throat impatiently. "Touching as this reunion is, we have business to conduct. Mr. Ward, you promised my wife, your wife, that you'd provide certain information once you saw your child. I'm here to collect." Thomas didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on the baby, on Sarah, as if looking away might make her disappear. "I remember what I promised." "Then tell me where the documents are hidden, now." "No," Thomas said quietly. Shaw's hand moved to his revolver. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Thomas finally looked up, and despite his physical frailty, there was steel in his gaze. "I've had 2 years in this cell to think about what you did to me, what you did to my family, and I've realized something. You're afraid. You've always been afraid. That's why you steal, why you lie, why you kill. Because deep down, you know you're nothing without the power you've taken from others. Philosophical observations won't save you, Ward. I'm already dead. The consumption's in my lungs, my blood. I have days at most, but you're terrified that the world will find out what you really are. And that's why I'm not giving you the evidence." Shaw pulled his revolver, pointed it directly at Thomas's head. "Then I'll kill you and take my chances. Go ahead. Kill me in front of my wife and child. Add one more crime to the list. See how that works out for you." "Shaw," Caleb said, his own hand moving toward his rifle, "think about what you're doing. I'm ending a problem. You're creating a dozen more. There's a federal marshal in this town asking questions. You kill Ward now, you'll have to explain why. How you got into the prison after hours. Why a dying man was shot in his cell. You really want that kind of attention?" Shaw's finger was on the trigger, his face twisted with rage. For a moment, Caleb thought he'd fire anyway, consequences be damned. Then Shaw lowered the gun with visible effort. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Then we do this differently. Mrs. Ward, you'll tell me where the evidence is, or I'll kill your husband slowly. I'll make sure his last hours are agony." "I already told you. I don't know where it is." "Then you'll convince your husband to tell me." "No, she won't," Thomas said. He handed the baby back to Elena, gently, reverently. Then he reached under his mattress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Because I'm giving the information to someone else." He held out the paper toward Marcus. Shaw lunged for it, but Marcus was faster. He snatched the paper, stepped back, unfolded it quickly. His eyes scanned the contents, widened. "This is—" Marcus looked up at Thomas. "This is the name of the account holder? And the bank, First National in Denver, Safety Deposit Box 247. The keys taped under the third bench in the prison chapel. Everything you need to destroy Shaw is in that box." "You bastard," Shaw said, his voice low and dangerous. "You planned this." "I had 2 years and nothing to do but plan." Thomas's breathing was getting worse, each word clearly costing him. "I knew you'd come eventually, knew you couldn't resist. And I knew you'd bring Elena because you needed her cooperation. I was counting on it. Then you signed her death warrant. And your daughter's. I signed yours." Thomas looked past Shaw to the hallway beyond. "Marshal Hendricks, I believe you've heard enough?"
Shaw spun around just as a man stepped out of the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a marshal's badge that caught the lamplight. He wasn't alone. 3 deputies emerged behind him, rifles raised. "Captain Garrett Shaw," the marshal said, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, theft of territorial property, and about a dozen other charges I haven't finished counting yet." Shaw's face went white. "This is entrapment. Nothing you heard here is admissible. I've got a signed confession from Mr. Ward, testimony from Mr. Webb regarding your attempt to suppress evidence, and 6 witnesses who just watched you threaten to torture a dying man." Marshal Hendricks gestured to his deputies. "Take him." Shaw's men moved for their weapons, but they were outmatched, and they knew it. The deputies had them covered from multiple angles. One by one, they raised their hands in surrender. Shaw himself didn't move. He just stared at Thomas with pure hatred. "You think this changes anything? I have friends, lawyers, judges in my pocket. I'll be out in a week." "Maybe," Thomas said, "but the evidence will still be there, and eventually someone will care. Someone always does." He started coughing then, a wet, rattling sound that bent him double. Elena was beside him immediately, supporting him, but there was nothing she could do. The coughing fit lasted almost a minute, and when it finally subsided, there was blood on Thomas's lips. "Get a doctor," Elena said desperately. "Please, someone get a doctor." "Elena," Thomas whispered, taking her hand. "It's all right. I'm all right." "You're not all right. You're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm dying. I've been dying for months, but I got to see you one more time. Got to meet our daughter. Got to watch Shaw lose everything he built on lies." He smiled, and despite the blood and the pain, it was genuine. "That's not a bad way to go." Marshal Hendricks moved closer. "Mr. Ward, if you can hold on a few more days, I need your testimony. Official deposition, everything on record. With that, I can make sure Shaw never sees daylight again." Thomas shook his head weakly. "I don't have days, but Marcus has everything you need. He was there when Shaw threatened me, when he talked about killing the prison guards who helped me. He can testify." "I will," Marcus said firmly. "Every word. And the documents in Denver, they'll speak for themselves." Thomas's grip on Elena's hand tightened. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't let Sarah grow up thinking her father was a criminal. Tell her the truth. Tell her I tried to do the right thing. She'll know, I swear it." Thomas nodded, satisfied. His eyes were starting to close. "I'm tired, Elena. So tired." "Then rest. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." "I know. You never did." He looked at Caleb then, a long, measuring look. "Take care of them. Both of them." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. "I will." "Good man." Thomas's eyes closed fully. His breathing slowed, became more labored. Elena was crying openly now, holding his hand, whispering things meant only for him. Marshal Hendricks gestured for his deputies to remove Shaw and his men. Shaw went quietly, his face blank with shock. He'd gambled everything and lost, and the reality was still sinking in. As they led him past Caleb, Shaw stopped. "You think you've won? This isn't over. I'll find a way." "You've already lost," Caleb said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." Shaw was dragged away, his protests fading down the corridor. Thomas Ward died 17 minutes later, holding Elena's hand, his daughter sleeping peacefully against her mother's chest. His last words were too quiet for anyone but Elena to hear, but whatever he said
This
made her
story was
smile through her
posted on the
tears.
channel west
The
of
prison doctor
Betrayal.
came,
Please do not
confirmed the death,
repost it in any
made
form.
arrangements for the body. Marshal Hendricks took statements from everyone, promised that justice would be served, then left them alone with their grief. It was Marcus who finally spoke into the silence. "He was a good man. Better than most." "He was a fool," Elena said, her voice hollow. "A brave, stubborn, principled fool who threw away everything for an idea." "The idea that some things matter more than survival," Caleb said. "That's not foolish. That's what separates us from animals." "Is it worth dying for?" Caleb thought about Sarah, about the family he'd lost, about 15 years of running from exactly this kind of pain. "I don't know, but I think Thomas thought it was." "And maybe that's enough." They buried Thomas Ward 3 days later in the prison cemetery,
under a cottonwood tree that had somehow survived the harsh Colorado winters. The marshal attended, along with Marcus, Caleb, and a handful of inmates who'd known Thomas and respected him. Elena stood at the graveside with baby Sarah wrapped against her chest, her face composed but her eyes distant. The prison chaplain said words about redemption and sacrifice. Elena didn't seem to hear them. She just stared at the wooden marker they'd placed at the head of the grave, at Thomas's name carved in simple letters. When it was over, when everyone else had drifted away, she finally spoke. "I don't know what to do now," she said quietly. "For 2 years, everything I did was about Thomas, visiting him, supporting him, believing in him. And now he's gone, and I have a daughter and no home and no money, and I don't know what to do." Caleb had been expecting this conversation, had been thinking about it since the moment Thomas died. "You have options. The marshal said Shaw's assets are being seized. Some of that money will go to his victims. You could file a claim. Blood money. Restitution. There's a difference." "Is there?" Elena turned to look at him, and her eyes were hard. "Thomas died for his principles. Am I supposed to honor that by taking Shaw's stolen money? You're supposed to honor it by raising your daughter, and you can't do that while living in a tent and eating roots. So I take the money, buy a house, pretend everything's fine. You take the money, start over, build the life Thomas wanted for you." Caleb paused, then added quietly, "Or you could come back with me." Elena blinked. "What?" "To the cabin. It's rough, but it's shelter. There's food, water, firewood. You could stay through winter, maybe longer. Give yourself time to figure out what comes next." "Caleb, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." He looked at the grave, at Thomas's name. "He asked me to take care of you both. I don't make promises lightly, and I don't break them. You want me to live in an isolated cabin in the mountains with a newborn baby? I want you to have time to heal, to be somewhere Shaw's lawyers can't find you, where his friends can't threaten you, where you can just be a mother to your daughter without looking over your shoulder every day." He met her eyes. "The world's not going anywhere. It'll still be here when you're ready for it." Elena was quiet for a long time, thinking. Then she looked down at Sarah, who was awake and watching the world with solemn dark eyes. "What do you think?" Elena asked the baby softly. "Should we trust the mountain man?" Sarah made a small noise that could have meant anything. Elena smiled faintly. "She says yes. Smart girl. She takes after her father." They left Cannon City a week later, after Marshal Hendricks had finished taking statements and Marcus had retrieved the documents from Denver. The evidence was everything Thomas had promised: ledgers showing Shaw's fraud, affidavits from witnesses, even correspondence with judges and officials Shaw had bribed. It was enough to destroy Shaw's empire and put him in prison for the rest of his life. Marcus stayed behind to help the marshal build the case. He'd found purpose in this fight, something to replace what Shaw had taken from him. Before they left, he pulled Caleb aside. "You're doing a good thing," he said, "taking them in. I'm just keeping a promise. It's more than that, and you know it." Marcus studied him. "You're getting a second chance, Caleb. A chance to be there for someone who needs you. Don't waste it." "I don't plan to." "Good." Marcus offered his hand. "If you ever need anything, if Shaw's people come looking, if there's trouble, you send word. I'll come." Caleb shook his hand. "I know you will." The journey back to the mountains took longer than Caleb expected. Elena was still recovering from childbirth, and Sarah needed frequent stops to nurse and rest. But they traveled at their own pace, without urgency, letting the world fall away behind them with each mile. They talked more on that journey than they had in all the weeks before. Elena told him about growing up in St. Louis, about meeting Thomas at a church social, about the farm they'd planned to buy before Shaw destroyed everything. Caleb found himself telling her about Sarah and Emma, about the guilt that had driven him into the mountains, about the 15 years he'd spent trying to outrun his own past. "You can't outrun it," Elena said one night as they sat by a campfire, Sarah sleeping between them. "I've tried. It always catches up." "So what do? You carry it. You let it change you. And eventually, if you're lucky, you find something worth carrying it for." She looked at her daughter. "Something like this."
They reached the cabin in early December as the first serious snow of winter was beginning to fall. The place looked exactly as they'd left it, rough, isolated, untouched by the chaos of the past weeks. Caleb had half expected to find it burned or ransacked by Shaw's remaining men, but apparently the captain's arrest had scattered his organization completely. Elena stepped inside, looked around at the sparse interior, and nodded. It's perfect. It's barely livable. It's safe. That makes it perfect. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine that felt both strange and natural. Caleb hunted and trapped, keeping them supplied with meat. Elena cooked and cleaned and cared for Sarah, transforming the cabin into something that felt less like a shelter and more like a home. They shared the work, shared the space, shared the long winter evenings by the fire. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they became something more than two people sharing a cabin. It happened in small moments. Caleb showing Elena how to set a snare, his hands guiding hers through the motions. Elena mending his shirt, her fingers careful with the needle. The way they moved around each other in the small space, anticipating, accommodating, learning each other's rhythms. One night, about a month after their return, Elena was nursing Sarah while Caleb worked on repairing a snowshoe. The fire crackled between them, warm and companionable. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Maybe." "Are you happy?" Caleb looked up, surprised. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. Are you happy? Here, now, with us?" He thought about it, really thought about it. For 15 years, he'd equated happiness with absence. Absence of responsibility, absence of connection, absence of the possibility of loss. But sitting here, in this cabin, with Elena and Sarah, he felt something different. Not the sharp edge of happiness he remembered from his youth, but something deeper, steadier. "Yes," he said finally. "I think I am." Elena smiled. "Good, because Sarah and I have been talking, and we've decided you're stuck with us." "Is that right?" "Unless you want us to leave, in which case we'll go, and you can have your solitude back." Caleb set down the snowshoe, looked at her directly. "I don't want you to leave." "Then we'll stay, if that's all right." "It's more than all right." They left it at that. No grand declarations, no promises about the future. Just an understanding that what they were building here mattered, that it was worth protecting. Winter deepened, and with it came challenges. A blizzard that lasted 5 days, trapping them inside the cabin with dwindling supplies. A pack of wolves that killed one of Caleb's snares and forced him to hunt in dangerous conditions. A fever that hit Sarah hard, leaving her listless and burning for 3 terrifying days before it finally broke. But they faced each challenge together, and somehow that made all the difference. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, the snow retreating inch by inch up the mountains. The creeks began to flow again. The aspens budded. And one morning in late March, Caleb woke to find Elena standing in the doorway, looking out at the valley with an expression he couldn't read. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing. I was just thinking." "About?" "About whether I want to leave." Caleb felt his chest tighten. "Do you?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to face him. "I told myself when I came here that it was temporary, that I'd stay until Sarah was old enough to travel, until I figured out where to go next. San Francisco, maybe, or Portland, somewhere big enough to disappear in. But I've been lying to myself. The truth is, I don't want to disappear. I want to stay here, with you, if you'll have us." Caleb stood
This story
close
was
to where she
posted on the
standing.
channel West of
"Elena, you've
Betrayal.
been through hell.
Please do not
Lost
repost
your
it
husband,
in any
gave
form.
birth in a mine, watched everything you knew get torn apart. Are you sure you're not just looking for stability, for safety?" "I'm sure I'm looking for both those things, but I'm also sure I'm looking for you." She met his eyes, unflinching. "I'm not asking you to replace Thomas. I'm not asking you to be a father to Sarah, though I think you already are. I'm asking if you want to build something with us. Something new, something ours." Caleb thought about the past 15 years of solitude, of running from connection because connection meant risk, meant the possibility of loss. And he thought about the past 4 months, about watching Elena's strength, about holding Sarah when she cried, about the way his cabin had become a home. The risk was still there. Elena could leave, Sarah could get sick. 1,000 things could go wrong. But standing here, looking at this woman who'd faced down armed men and given birth in a wilderness and never once broken, he realized something. The risk was worth it. "Yes," he said, "I want to build something with you." Elena's smile was like sunrise. "Then I guess we're staying." They were married in midsummer by a traveling preacher who passed through Leadville twice a year. Marcus came up from Cannon City to stand as witness, bringing news that Shaw had been sentenced to 20 years and that the territorial government had established a commission to investigate land fraud. Thomas's sacrifice had started something bigger than any of them had imagined. At the small ceremony, with Sarah babbling happily in Elena's arms, the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union. Marcus grinned and said, "About time someone made an honest woman of her." Elena laughed, and Caleb found himself laughing too. The sound strange and unfamiliar after so many years. They spent their first year as a family making improvements to the cabin, adding a room for Sarah, building a proper chimney, expanding the garden Elena had started. Caleb taught Elena how to shoot, how to read the weather, how to survive in the mountains. Elena taught him how to talk again, how to trust again, how to let someone see him without his walls up. Sarah grew from a fragile newborn into a sturdy toddler, fearless and curious, with her mother's determination and her father's eyes. On her first birthday, they walked to the meadow where Elena had first stumbled onto Caleb's cabin, and they stood there together, the three of them, looking at the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked, "taking us in that night?" Caleb looked at Sarah, who was chasing a butterfly through the wildflowers, and at Elena, who'd gone from a desperate stranger to his wife. He thought about the man he'd been, hollow, haunted, half alive, and the man he was now. "Not for a second," he said. "Even though we destroyed your peaceful solitude?" "Especially because of that." He took her hand. "Turns out peace and solitude aren't the same thing. Took me 15 years to figure that out." Elena leaned into him, and they stood there watching Sarah play. Two people who'd been broken by the world and somehow found a way to piece each other back together. Somewhere to the south, in a federal prison, Garrett Shaw was discovering what it meant to lose everything. Somewhere in Cannon City, Marcus was building a new life, helping the marshal's office track down corruption. And somewhere beneath a cottonwood tree, Thomas Ward rested, his sacrifice honored by the family he'd saved. But here, in this valley, life went on. Simple, difficult, beautiful. The kind of life worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Caleb Harlan held his wife and watched his daughter play, and for the first time in 16 years he felt something that had eluded him for so long. He felt home. The winter that had brought them together had been brutal, unforgiving, almost fatal, but it had also brought second chances, new beginnings, and the kind of love that only comes from surviving the worst together. And that, Caleb thought, as Sarah ran toward them with a flower clutched in her tiny fist, was worth every frozen mile, every moment of fear, every sacrifice along the way. They had built something from nothing. From pain and loss and the ashes of old lives, they had created something new, a family, a home, a future. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was theirs, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.